direction of the council. And Yvonne, since you put this together, I'm going to give you an opportunity to kind of give us a quick overview on that.
I apologize. I got him ready, but I didn't get me ready.
Oh.
What's going to occur at this time is the direction of the City Council. We have in your binder where the council asked us to convene the committee. And in that, the council spoke about wanting to review certain sections of the charter, which the committee will be doing. The committee is an advisory role. City Council has ultimate decision-making authority. Agenda reports will be written by staff, so that's what we're here for, and it's presented to City Council at future meetings. It is a privilege to serve on the committee, and members should retain their objectivity and conscientiously work on the issues at hand, and the majority, and I vote the committee is needed to make the recommendation to City Council. And that's it.
Now, they prepared a binder for you. Does everyone have the binder? Okay, good. Well, in the binder itself, there are a number of sections. And Yvonne, why don't you do me a favor and kind of walk us through the sections so that we'll get a good overview of that.
Okay. So the binder is to help you maintain materials that will be handed out, such as the type of city clerk tax and documents for you. There's a listing of your committee members or your colleagues for tonight and staff. So if you have any needs, you can always contact city manager's office, and I'm here to assist and helping the city manager and also city attorney and city clerk. Meeting agendas have been proposed to assist with your scheduling, and the dates that have been chosen. There are 2 meetings that will be at City Hall, and those are noted on the agenda. Scheduling is difficult, so we're going to try to keep our schedule as much as we can for your convenience and as well as the logistics. Agendas will be coming out to you. As you notice, there's an item on the agenda for tonight that talks about future topics. So typically we'll be getting ready for the next meeting, so we will have that ready to present to you at the next meeting, which will be in 2 weeks from now. Your minutes will be proposed at the committee, and we will have an opportunity to approve them. On the minutes, it's my understanding that unless there's an action proposed in them, typically it'll be like a staff report that will be presented to council, and that would then be the direction of the committee to staff to do that. The ground rules are really for, yes?
Can I interrupt for a question?
Sure.
Who's going to be keeping minutes?
I will be keeping minutes. Okay. The ground rules for the meeting is really, being conscientious of your colleagues, being courteous in your presentations, and just to give an overall opportunity for everyone to have an opportunity to speak. As you notice, you have mics on, so some people have a quieter voice or having difficulty speaking tonight. So hopefully the mics will be of assistance. They can be shared. So in this room, we are only able to support 4. The agenda report that convened the committee is item number 6, and then the sections that we know of that are being requested to review by council have been excerpted from the charter for your convenience. And the full charter is item 8, and so that will take us for it's time for what you have in your materials for the budget. Oh, excuse me, for the charter review committee.
Any questions so far?
The question from the council, not really mentioned it, but I wasn't really sure where that resides.
The agenda report that convened the committee is in the binder, and at that time the council spoke about what they wanted the charter review committee to look at. Mainly election, how we handle our elections, and that will be discussed through the agenda. And the other one was council compensation, and then to review other sections of the charter that the committee may believe need to be updated and made current.
When I was at the meeting, I heard the discussion. I didn't hear specifically the council give that direction, saying these are what we want you to do. It was discussed, but I never heard that direction. That maybe council member knows that's what they gave.
Well, I think that it's just some general direction, but as you go forward with your work, I think we're going to rely upon the committee to come back with suggestions. As long as we go through the process and you get a majority vote here to recommend it, but there is flexibility for you to look at a number of things.
How would I be talking about that in bullet point 4? We can talk about the explicit council direction and maybe how that might branch out.
Any other questions? Okay, the city attorney is going to give you an overview of the Brown Act, and I'll turn it over to Ren.
Good evening, everyone. Don't need to spend a lot of time on the Brown Act, largely because this is such a large body, 17 people, but many of you already have a pretty good familiarity with what the Brown Act is, and that essentially are the California open meeting laws. And what that means is that this is a legislative body. You've been, for purposes of the Brown Act and California law, you've been appointed by the City Council as a charter review committee, and for Brown Act purposes, that is a legislative body. And those kinds of bodies cannot take action on items that are not agendized pursuant to a posting for a regular meeting must be posted 72 hours in advance. And so a meeting under the Brown Act technically is any gathering for communication with a majority of you, and that's 9 people. With a group of 17, that won't happen on a spontaneous basis very often, if ever. And so we don't really need to talk about those kinds of situations very often unless you appoint a subcommittee. There may be a particular issue, whether it's district elections or one of the other issues where you might feel it's appropriate. If you want further discussion on a particular item, you may appoint a subdivision of, say, 3. And so under the Brown Act, a majority of those 3 people, i.e. 2 of you, can't act on an item that's not on an agenda that's noticed to the public. But with this big group, with 17 people and a majority of 9, that's probably not going to happen. But one caution I would give you, and that is, and I give this to all elected officials as well, and that is email communications and kind of spontaneous communications by phone or any kind of media device. Be really careful and mindful of the fact that one of you may have an idea and email one of your colleagues on the committee, who then emails another colleague, who then emails another colleague. And once you get a majority of that body, then you've got a meeting under the Brown Act, and that's technically a Brown Act violation. Because again, with a large number of you, that's probably not going to happen. But if we do break into smaller groups, it's something that we're going to have to be mindful of. So I think that's about all we need to cover on that subject, unless you have questions. Yes, sir.
Sorry. What you're saying, it's interesting. I can see where that'd be the issue. And I wonder, is like a telephone call is not something that can be copied and sent. So would that be as sensitive?
No, I mean, if you have an issue that we talked about in one of these meetings, if you would like to discuss with one of your colleagues, there's no problem with doing that. Absolutely none. But just be mindful of if those communications build on each other, and then a majority of you end up having a discussion on a particular issue, you've got a meeting under the Brown Act, and technically that's a Brown
Yeah, I understood that part. I just wondered about the phone.
Probably not going to happen, but just be mindful of, I think the only issues that might come up outside of a committee structure are going to be those kinds of communications, usually by email. That's where that happens. Any other questions?
I have one. What if we all happen to attend the same council meeting? Is there anything we should be?
That's a very good question. That's a really good question. I think, and this comes up with the city council a lot, just to give you an example. Deborah was asking if a majority of you should happen to attend a council meeting or a planning commission meeting or whatever, whereas let's say 10 of you, that's a majority of you, would be in the same place attending a meeting. If you don't participate in that meeting, you're just there to observe, then that's not a meeting for Brown Act purposes of this body. However, if you do discuss committee business and do participate, then that could be a meeting. So that's a very good question. Everybody understand that? So there's no prohibition about that. Or, for example, if a majority of you happen to be at a social event or a community event, you're just there for that event. You're not here to meet as the charter review committee, so that wouldn't be a problem in and of itself either. A lot of you are involved in a lot of community groups and see each other at those kinds of events. That's not a problem by itself. Any other questions?
Okay, terrific.
And if you have any issue on that as we move forward in the future, you can certainly just call me.
We'll move on to item 3, election of a chair and a vice chair. The city clerk will give us an overview on that, and then we'll entertain nominations.
Well, that's pretty much the same way that you would expect it to happen. If anybody is interested in being the chair, they can nominate themselves. Or if you're interested in someone else being the chair and you'd like to nominate them, you can do that as well. It's a fairly simple voting process. Majority wins, depending on how many people there are. You can consider having multiple votes. But if the group is small, you like this, you vote for somebody, and when the group down, if you get more than one person. So as we get started, why don't we simply see whether or not there's anybody who would like to nominate anyone for chair.
I'd like to nominate Beverly Silva.
Next second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there anybody else who would nominate someone?
Nominate Bruce Sweeney.
So we have a nomination for Mr. Sweeney. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. Okay. In that case, we have, are there any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate myself.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. So we have 3 folks to consider. Are there any other nominations?
This is for the chair.
Correct. Let's set a standard of 3 minutes for you guys to share. Why you think you would be a chair? It'll allow you a little bit of time to share that with the group. 3 minutes. And why don't we go in the order of the nominations, Ms. Silva?
Well, I've chaired on the city civil service commission before, so I've done that before. I think I can help in terms of trying to make sure that everybody gets heard. I think that's important, it's more important. And I also want to make sure, as the chair, that we stay focused. There's a lot of TV we can look at, but if we're not clear on the direction, we should make sure that the chairperson brings it all in and tries to make sure we understand what we're trying to accomplish here, and what problem we're really trying to solve. So that's where I see it.
Mr. Sweeney?
My involvement in the community has been through a lot of nonprofits. Michigan City Community Fund, I've been the president for 2 years. I'm now involved in Rotary, I've been there for 5 years, and I run the largest profit making venture we have, which is the Silicon Valley Barbecue Championships, which we joint venture with the Parks Department. It's very profitable. On the Planning Commission, been on there for 40 years, almost 40 years now. I know how to run a meeting. I'm also on which I'm representing as the chair of the board of directors for the Santa Clara Chamber of Commerce. For a few months.
And Mr. Rafal?
I was really excited to be a part of this committee. I'm a policy wonk. This is my Super Bowl, so I prepared a statement. I have a very diverse professional background. I have a degree in biochemistry and have worked as a biochemical lab researcher. I've also been a middle school math teacher. The last 5 years, I've worked in politics and government. My experience has taught me valuable skills that will make me a great community chair, I believe. As a scientist, I've learned the value of facts and objectivity when it comes to making decisions in policy. As a teacher, I've learned how to get a group of rowdy preteens to come to one decision, which is really difficult, as we may know. And working in politics and government has given me valuable professional experience related to elections in all government systems. In my role as a policy expert for the federal government, I've had a deep understanding of how laws and policies can affect communities. And because of the importance of this committee into the future of Santa Clara, I've taken preparation for this committee very seriously. I reached out to more than half the previous committee members on this, the previous charter committee, and I reached out to campaign and election reform experts both in California and Washington in the last month to make sure I have the most updated information on these issues. I just wanted to add that when I did get a call from Councilman Kolstad to appoint me to this committee, I was really surprised. He and I don't always agree on everything, but he told me the reason he wanted to appoint me to this committee is because he has known my work and known me to be an open-minded, fair, hardworking, and the closest thing that he knows to an expert on some of these issues. So I'm confident that I have the necessary experience, knowledge, and management skills to be an effective chair and to leave here having everyone had given an opportunity to express their opinion, and we come to one decision. Thank you.
Can I ask a question of the attorney before we proceed?
Yes, sir.
Hypothetical, if one of the things that we're looking at in here is to evaluate compensation of city council members, would it be perceived perhaps as a conflict of interest if the chair of this particular committee filed for office while we were in session?
I think that question is probably a little more relevant on the electoral system than compensation.
I mean, as far as the way that they're registered in districts, et cetera, that wouldn't be effective for this election.
Technically, a council member voting as a member of the body on the body's compensation has been found by the California Attorney General to not be a conflict on that specific issue. So I would say the answer would be no.
Okay, fantastic.
It's a good question.
Before we take votes, can we ask questions or make comments? Or no?
Sure, please.
So I just wanted to make a comment. I honestly don't know most of you, actually none of you personally. I've worked with some of you before, but I did attend, I was appointed by Teresa, but I did attend the city council when they were selecting the remaining of the candidates. And I do want to point out that there's one person in here who received a vote from every single council member, and that was Beverly. So I will probably vote for Beverly because I trust that if somebody gets a vote from the entire council, that's probably the person that to lead the committee.
Yeah, I would also speak on Beverly's behalf. I thought it was in Santa Clara, the president did that. Everybody agreed to appoint somebody, so I thought that was great. I've also had the privilege of working with Beverly, and I know her level of professionalism. I know her level of being thorough and fair, and so that's one of the reasons that I nominated her, because of again, the council's unanimous decision and my work history with Beverly.
Any other comments before we move on to voting? Okay, if that's the case, we have a smallish group, and a group of simple show of hands would be appropriate. We'll take them in the order that they were nominated again. Ms. Silva, Mr. Sweeney, and then Mr. Rafat. First, just a show of hands, and please only vote once. Okay, so a show of hands for Ms. Silva. 6, 7, 8, 9. Show of hands for Mr. Sweeney. 2. And show of hands for Mr. Rafat. 2. Okay. Ms. Silva, you have a majority. Congratulations. The chair, the floor is yours.
Oh my gosh, I have to take it on now? You're in the hot seat here.
Yeah. Okay, so the review of the binder materials. Vice chair. Yeah, let's call we'll call for a vote for the vice chair. Do I hear any nominations?
First of all, why don't you describe what the vice chair does?
Vice chair is responsible for serving as the chair in the event the chair is unable to be there.
I'll nominate myself.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Nominate yourself and then second.
I nominate Saskia Fan, who is currently on her way back to New Jersey.
Would anybody like to say anything with regards to their nomination?
I would. Saskia is the chair of the Citizen Advisory Committee and has done a very good job of trying to get the city to re-recognize the Citizen Advisory Committee as a valid committee. And she's done a lot of outreach to the community, and I think will be one of the people that really will work on getting the community involved. And right now, it's, in my opinion, one of the shortcomings of our city is not enough community involvement. So I'd like to see her as a chair, and I know that she'd do a fabulous job working with Beverly and also making sure the citizens have a voice in what they're doing in this community.
So,
I'm going to rescind my nomination if that's possible, and only because I didn't think anybody wanted to. I'm the president of youth soccer, which is God help me. And you know, I was recently chair of the Parks and Rec Commission, so I'm actually going to rescind it, and I'm going to support Ahmed because I think he has really done his homework. And if this is his Super Bowl, then I'd like to don't pass.
Mr. Fod, anything like you'd like to add in just your comments?
Touchdown.
And Mr. Lodge?
You know, I know many of the people in the room. I'd be happy to serve as vice chair of the committee. As I was a department head in the city, as most of you know, I was the elected police chief, so I was very familiar with the charter and the importance to the city. And so if this is the first time some people are looking at the charter, I think it can be a little daunting because it's our constitution. And so I think I might be able to help with my experience with the charter.
Are there any questions for the nominees? In case we'll move forward and vote. We'll vote first for Ms. Fain, next for Mr. Rafat, and next for Mr. Lodge. Saskia Fain. 1, 2. And Mr. Rafat. 4. And Mr. Lodge. 5, 6. That does not provide you with a majority yet, which means that we will have one more round of voting. Do people not vote? They don't have to hear.
Oh, I didn't vote. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Did you want to vote for yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe I'm not going to be a good vice
This is your Super Bowl.
I'm nervous.
You're gonna be there for the
It was a famous touchdown.
Let's vote between now Mr. Rafa and Mr. Lodge. So first, hands for Mr. Rafa. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And hands for Mr. Lodge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, Mr. Lodge.
And a review and the council direction to the charter review committees.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about really the 3 areas that the City Council gave direction for this committee, and they're really meant as parameters to address Howard's point. Some of these subjects are very complex, particularly the electoral system. That alone is going to take some time, but just to get started, there were 3 items. 2 of them are pretty broad, one's pretty narrow. The first is the method of electing the City Council. That's what started this, and really what's meant by that is evaluating the system of electing the City Council. I'm going to get to this in more detail, but we have an at-large by seat system now. Most cities of Santa Clara's size and smaller have just a straight at-large system. Many cities have district elections, and we'll cover that in way more detail down the road. Some cities have hybrid systems consisting of both at-large system and districts, depending on whether the primaries or the general election. So we'll be talking about all of those in quite some detail down the road. I want to make sure that everybody understands the difference between an election or a method of electing the council and actually voting systems. The last time in 2014, when the Charter Review Committee got together to evaluate this, many voting advocates came forward for alternate voting systems like ranked choice or cumulative voting that are used in some jurisdictions like Oakland and San Francisco. That's kind of a different issue. That doesn't mean we can't evaluate it, but it doesn't have really a whole lot to do with the California Voting Rights Act. So they're 2 separate issues, and when we get into that detail, we can certainly talk about that. So that's issue number 1. Issue number 2 is council compensation. That's a pretty straightforward issue. It's set by the charter. If we change that or we go to some other system, it would require a charter amendment. So we'll talk about that in more detail down the road. And then finally, which is kind of a catch-all area, number 3 is the council directed the committee to look at basically provisions of the charter that are either illegal or obsolete. The last time this was done was in 1999. I've advised the city council, I think the clerk and I both came to the conclusion that there's no glaring examples of that right now. There aren't any charter provisions that are presently now illegal or obviously obsolete. This committee may feel differently. There may be certain provisions of the charter that this committee as a group might decide need to be changed because they don't suit the needs of the community anymore. They're not per se obsolete, but you may feel that they need to be changed for various reasons. It's not meant to be a catch-all to open up the entire charter and look at every single thing. We'll never get through it if we're looking at every single charter provision. Just the bare bones of these 3 items are going to be complex enough without reopening the entire charter. But that was the charge of the city council, and that's what we'll move forward on. So any questions on those items?
I do have a question. On the last topic that you mentioned about not opening up the entire charter, so is it a correct understanding that the charter is just the first chapter preceding the entire city code, right? So we are not looking at anything with regard to the rest of the city code? Or would that, if there was a particular issue that we believe in the rest of the city code that is warranting the discussion because of maybe it's
No, this is a charter review committee. Just the charter. The distinction is, and many of you know this, is a code provision can be amended by at any time. All it takes is to draft an ordinance and have a first reading and a second reading, and the city council votes on it, and the code can be changed, or the code can be amended with a new ordinance really at any time. The charter, I suppose, I think Mr. Lott referred to it as the city's constitution. It's a pretty accurate characterization. Charters cannot be changed except by the vote of the people because we are a charter city.
Okay. So then the answer is no, that we do not need to be looking at anything through the rest of the city.
Next time I'll just say no.
Answer like a true attorney.
So, I'm sorry, would you clarify, it is the entire charter that's open for our review?
It is, but the council's direction was to at least initially look at illegal or obsolete provisions of the charter.
That's not what I heard in the meeting when they discussed this. There were several discussions of the findings that specifically did not limit this committee to that. So,
Well, certainly if it's the will of the committee to look at a
just want to
particular
make sure that's still
a
understood.
particular charter provision, certainly that's the majority of you feel that particular charter provision needs to be amended or eliminated, then certainly it's the purview of this body to do that. Certainly.
Or something added.
Correct.
Correct.
And was something else you said earlier, and I wasn't, perhaps Yvonne said it, but that the city council, whatever we come up with, we say, okay, we want to make these amendments and make these changes, we voted on it, we all agree this is good. And you're saying that the city council has to approve that before it can go on the ballot? Is that what I heard?
Well, ultimately, we're going to cover this later on in the meeting, but ultimately, this body will come forward with a body of proposed changes to the charter, and the council will have to approve that and then go through all the election code procedures to get it on a ballot. And I'll talk about that in some detail, and that has some procedural significance because charter amendments brought forward by a charter review committee as opposed to the city council on its own motion completely changed the timetable under the elections code. And we'll get to that in a little bit, but your question is quite relevant. But I'm assuming that this body will come forward with one or more proposed charter changes which will be brought forward to the council as a package.
Right, and if that package included, say, 4 changes.
Right.
Then would the council be able, legally be able to look at it and say, well, we like 3 of them, but we're going to throw 1 of them out?
I think yes. But I think out of respect to the charter review process, I think that's a decision that they would not take lightly.
But that really kind of puts it in our place.
Well, and I'd like to add on to that, just a follow-up. Is there a way to go back to the city council once we determine what we think, especially in that last one, which is a little vague, where we think that these items need to be reviewed to get more further refined direction at that point before we go into all of the work to do 4 items and then have them put 1 out?
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. certainly, you know, if there's a particular provision in the charter which this body wants to review, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. But we've got a finite period of time, and some of these issues, I can tell you, the electoral system alone is going to take quite a bit of time and complexity to get through. And so, just
What is our timeline? You keep mentioning the finite amount of time. What is our timeline?
The election code, the clock is ticking for the November ballot already.
Right.
And we'll talk about that in some detail. In fact, Rod has a timeline for you. We do have a finite period of time for the November election. Obviously, we can move forward into the next year election unless we call it a special city election, which are very expensive. We're talking about 2-year timetables here. So.
And through the chair, I have one additional question. Is it possible that we can present a package and say this is our entire package and ask that it not be taken apart as a committee?
Certainly. Certainly.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that?
Okay. History of the city charter revisions for elections at city council, city clerk.
You guys have a memo from the charter review history and timelines. Looks like this, and that have taken places. And what we wanted to do is give you, in general, some context about what we considered in charter review processes. And more recently, in the past 3 times the charter review committee has been called together, how long it took them to get through even what were some fairly defined subject areas, so you can get a judge kind of the workflow on how you guys want to pace yourselves. The first thing that we provided here is just a history of the ballot initiatives that have been either driven by the community or placed on the ballot by the council proactively that related to the city charter. And so you can see there have been a number of those over the years. In fact, the city charter was approved in 1951, I believe. In November 1952, they started to make the charter amendments. So that's happened fairly regularly over the course of the last 64 years.
Just to clarify, the present charter was approved in 1951. There were many incarnations that go back long before that, right?
Correct. And that's just for your education, so you can see the type of things that were considered in the past, whether they were approved or not, the margin by which that occurred, and some precedents there. Perhaps more relevant to this conversation, though, is an outline of the last 3 charter review committees that were brought together. The first in 1999 was formed to do a general review of the city charter, to make sure that the charter complied with current law, to make sure that it removed gender biases from the city charter, and look at the city council compensation. At the time, while over the years the charter had been updated piecemeal, it had never been assessed broadly since it was initially created, this version of the city charter in 1952. So that had been almost 50 years worth of updating that had to occur. And it was done in a very efficient manner. That I believe the chair of the committee was Judy Reinhardt, if anybody remembers Judy, and served the committee pretty well. That charter review committee was appointed on July 20th, 1999, and brought back their recommendation to the council on November 9th. So that took them 3.5 months or so to get through that conversation. Yes?
Since we're making amendments to the charter, aka the Constitution, is this going to be a majority vote on the council, or would it have to be like a super majority?
Just a majority of this event about.
And what about out of here?
Well, that'll be for you guys to
Okay.
decide. Usually it's a simple majority.
Okay.
The next was with regards to the bidding of public works projects. There's a section in the city charter that deals with how those will be bid. And at the time the stadium was being built, there was a desire to do a design build concept. That committee was constituted on August 18, 2009, and brought a recommendation back to the council on October 27th. So that lasted about a month and a half, something like that. I'll share with you guys, though, that time frame was truncated. They actually did not bring to the council a recommendation to change the city charter. time, there had been a legislative option that was created by Senator Alquist that allowed the Charter Review Committee to simply recommend to the council that they seek that legislative option rather than going through the charter. So I don't know that those deliberations occurred in the same time frame that they normally would have had. They had to actually recommend the charter. And the next was with regards to the election system, and that happened in 2011. That group was constituted in August of 2011 and brought that recommendation back to the council in February of 2012. So that discussion took quite a bit more time. I share those time frames with you with regards to how long it took them to make those deliberations, and that for the city to have something on the ballot to be considered in the November 2016 general election, our last day to get the resolutions to them and to request that to happen with the registrar's office is going to be August 12th. Your group will have to have deliberated, made a recommendation to the council, and gotten that to them in the beginning of, for the city council's meetings in July. They've got 2 meetings in July, so they'll have to have a meeting to be able to deliberate whether or not what you're recommending is something that they want to approve and suggest to the voters. And at the next meeting, we'll have to bring a series of resolutions back to them so that they can formally request that those be placed on the ballot by the registrar's office, which means realistically, your work here needs to be done by the end of June to allow for that process to happen. I'll share that with you, and that we're already in February. It's a fairly tight time frame. Looking at what the city attorney has very correctly said is a pretty robust body of policy and discussion that you guys have. With that, I'll stop and see if you have any questions in general.
Yeah, I have one question, Rod. So if we're supposed to give them a recommendation by June, we have a series of meetings after June. Is there any particular reason why we have those on the calendar? Is we have to have everything done by the end of June? Or is it that we may not come to an agreement, we're going to have to go beyond that date?
That will be the discussion that you guys will have to have as a committee. The timelines go as longer than that, in that there's no requirement of this committee that this go on the November 2016 ballot.
Okay.
You'll have to decide whether or not you want to bring something to that
I'll be
ballot.
able to cover some of that at the end.
Thanks.
Whether you want to bring to that ballot or a subsequent ballot, or whether or not you want to take off pieces of the recommendation from them. In fact, as a group, we kind of just depends on what you guys want. Yes.
So can the committee decide to meet more often, prior to June, conduct more business to meet that date?
I can see why not from the city attorney.
Certainly.
Okay.
Certainly.
Does this need to be on a general election ballot, or can it be on a primary ballot?
Well, that gets a little more complex, and I'll defer to the city attorney.
Yeah, I was going to cover this at the end, but I can cover it now. Charter amendments are tricky. The election code is somewhat confusing on this, but charter amendments that are brought forward by a charter review commission have to go on statewide general election. That means November. There are certain instances when charter amendments can be brought forward at other times, and we'll cover that largely related to compliance with the California Voting Rights Act and some other limited issues, but by and large, for our purposes here, we're going to assume a general election.
So just so that I make sure I understood what you said, if we have a lot to do, so if we decide that we want certain aspects to go on November, but we need more time to look at other things, can we do that? Make a recommendation for maybe just 1 or 2 pieces of it, and then continue to evaluate and do that recommendation later for another piece of the charter review?
I don't know that there's anything that would legally preclude you from recommending that
I would
process.
say yes.
At the same time, I'll say as a precedent, normally, at least for the past 3 charter review committees, they've been constituted, done their work, made a recommendation to council, and then been deconstituted, I suppose. They don't tend to be ongoing ad hoc committees similar to what you see as a board of commission or as a council committee. So they tend to have kind of a finite lifespan. That's something that you as a committee need to determine whether or not you have desire to continue to meet longer than that time frame, or you simply want to focus your discussions in a more efficient manner, meeting more often. Or as you begin to build momentum, whether or not you're actually able to work through some of these issues more quickly than previous charter committees had.
I have a question on that issue, which is, who is going to have the authority to disband us? Is it our decision as a committee that our work is done, and then we decide to decommission the committee? Or is it the city council will, since they appointed us, they will? So if we decided, for example, to recommend some changes for November, but wanted to continue on for some additional changes, could the council say, nope, that your work is done, thanks for your time, type of a thing? Or is it, do we get to decide when our work is done?
You always serve at the will of council.
Okay.
So they could decide at the next city council meeting that you guys are meeting. So that would be their choice. Your other question was with regards to whether or not, if you guys think your work is done, they can obligate you to continue to serve, and now they can't really have a right to be able to say, no, you're done, see you later. Volunteers.
Ron, the information you just read from the dates and the information, we have that in our packet somewhere?
No, that's just provided here.
Can we get you copies of that, please?
I don't even know how I will get you copies of it.
We just gave a whole bunch of dates with what they met for and the timeframes, and you're reading from something, can we have a copy of that, please?
Well, I'm reading from the report.
Okay, that's
Okay. You guys, at the end of this, you've got also, this is the city council meeting calendar, just so you guys know when the council meetings occur. Then also, this is the abbreviated elections calendar, so you can see kind of time frames of the registrar's office. I'll give you certain things to cover down. Just as a background, that help you be sure that you read those numbers.
It is kind of obvious, but I want to make sure, looking like review committee or maybe it was a full chart review committee, but like in '99, it looked like they came up with about 5 or 6 different proposals, and they were going down each one into a proposition. So then if we came up with 4 proposals, and then if all 4 were accepted, then they would be 4 different propositions, 4 different items on the ballot.
Typically, yes, as opposed to a slate.
Makes sense. John, you tell us about this.
Brad, I'm just wondering if there might be some missing pages, because what you were reading, you don't have in your copy here. It goes up to page 10, up to 2006. Am I looking in the wrong place?
No, 2000, this is of the actual charter amendments that, that occurred. So you've got the 1999 one. The 2009 charter review committee did not recommend a charter change, so that's not listed here, and that there wasn't an election. They chose a legislative remedy instead of a charter review committee.
Just for clarification, which document are you reading from?
I'm reading from
This is the first page of the first
There's some dates on that first page. That was for me too.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, there's some dates in there you was reading that I didn't cover.
Yeah.
So the Venue for Public Works Projects Charter Review Committee did not make a recommendation for a charter, an actual charter amendment, so that's not listed on the history. Additionally, with regards to the election system, that report was received and not placed on the ballot, so there wasn't anything to include in history.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions before we move on? Yes.
That was also true in 2012, that they made a recommendation that nothing was put on the ballot, is that?
Correct.
Okay, current charter provision for election of council members.
Sure, I'll cover this quickly. The provisions for the election of council members are found in chapter 6 and 7 of the charter. In section 600, as you all know, it states that council members are presently elected at large, which means they're elected citywide and not from a particular area. We'll break this down into really what this means. There's various hybrids of at-large systems. We have the at-large by seat system. We in Sunnyvale have virtually the same system. But for all intents and purposes, it's an at-large system. Our mayor is elected separately. Each of the council and mayor serve 4-year terms under section 600 of the charter. The designation by seat provisions in the charter are found in section 6 or 700 and following. And in that section, you'll find the term limits section that the charter assigns to council members, and what that says is neither the mayor nor the council shall serve 2 consecutive terms. It's kind of a unique attribute of Santa Clara's charter. We don't really have outright term limits. We use the phraseology 2 consecutive terms, and that's allowed various council members to serve various tenures on the council, really all they have to do is sit out one election cycle, and it's like hitting the reset button, and then they can serve again if they're so elected. And then there's a specific provision in there that time served as mayor and the council are counted separately, they're not counted the same. So those are the provisions in the charter that are relevant for our consideration today. One of the things that we'll be talking about in great detail is our at-large system and how that interplays with, I guess, to some degree, the Federal Voting Rights Act, but more importantly, the California Voting Rights Act. Many cities in California have been challenged on their at-large system under the California Voting Rights Act. And we'll talk about that later on in some detail. And some cities, in response to those challenges, have changed their system to a district election system. So that's those are the relevant provisions in the charter on the election of city council members. Any questions?
Do we have copies of the California Voting Rights Act?
No.
No. You're just gonna talk about it.
I'm happy to provide that. It's a very thick document, like as in 6 inches. I'm happy to provide that.
Well, is there a summary?
Well, what I was going to do in a later meeting was go through it in some detail in a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm happy to provide a print summary of that.
Yeah, that would be great.
It's pretty complex. Any other questions?
By request, I would like to get an actual copy of it so we can make our own
Certainly.
determination.
Certainly.
I don't know.
Actually, if you could just make reference to online, what you feel, in your opinion, would be the best version for us to read, because, I mean, I respect a print copy. I'd like to have it just electronically.
That's an excellent suggestion.
So if you could provide that.
Anyone object to that? Okay. Any other questions?
You had mentioned at one city council meeting that we have been sued or been threatened with suit. Could you give
No,
us a copy of
I did
that?
not make that characterization, so I'll be clear about that. Certainly, we were challenged in 2011, and that's why the Charter Review Committee was convened in that time. And ultimately, the Charter Review Committee back then made the determination that they did not want to go to district elections. In fact, they recommended a change from at-large by seat to a straight at-large system, and the City Council ultimately decided not to act on that. What we talked about at the City Council meeting is that many, like I said a minute ago, many cities that have at-large systems, at least by last count, I think 22 of them within California, just since the last time the Charter Review Committee was constituted, have been challenged on their at-large system. It is incredibly devastating to those cities from a cultural standpoint, a political standpoint, a financial standpoint. But oftentimes those challenges have ended up with cities shouldering multi-million-dollar attorney fee awards. And so there is a kind of a preemptive element to this. No one has challenged the city at this point. There is no pending challenge. There is no threat. That could change, but it may not change. So obviously, if a challenge were to come forward, that might change the character of these proceedings, maybe to some degree, but there is no such challenge right now.
Are you using the term challenge and sued interchangeably? Because she asked if we've been sued, and you said, oh, no, that happened, but I thought you said that we had been challenged.
That's a good question, Howard. Under the California Voting Rights Act, you can't just sue. You have to give a jurisdiction a chance to self-correct first. And obviously, even under legal parameters, you still have to, the court can't impose a charter change. And so what happens, in fact, in recently, I believe in the city of Palmdale, which went through a very painful change from at-large to district voting, the city council voted to put district elections on the ballot as they were required to do, and they were not passed by the voters. And ultimately, that creates a situation where there's still a court finding that there was a violation of the California Voting Rights Act, that the voters haven't changed their systems. So Palmdale is still wrestling with that like today. But under the act, the city must have a chance to self-correct before someone goes into the court system. So,
Just a real quick question, because it sounds like you're talking about precedent. And it sounds like there's a number of precedents that the reason cities have been challenged because they're not following. Is there a certain law that mandates, I mean, when we look at Santa Clara, is there a certain threshold that says if you cross this threshold, then you must become a district type election? Or because to be sued, what is the basis for the suit is what I'm trying to figure out.
That's a really good question, and the answer is yes, but it's an art, not a science. And so under the California Act, which is the bar is much lower than the federal act, and we're going to get into this in some detail.
Yeah, I'm just from a real high level. I'm
Sure.
just curious because you're talking about precedent,
Okay.
and I'm thinking about what this body's going to do. But if there's already a precedent that's been set, that there's some sort of a mandate, and I think that kind of changes the whole.
And the answer to that is, with respect to Santa Clara, there is no precedent or mandate present. A court needs to find that there's racially polarized voting. That's a term of art, and that's a very complex analysis, which we'll talk about. But that could mean a lot of different things.
But we'll get to it.
I mean, a lot of cities that have been successfully challenged have been majority Latino communities. That's a much easier analysis. I like to call them the low-hanging fruit, like school districts in the Central Valley that have an overwhelmingly majority Latino population, or cities that have an overwhelmingly majority Asian population. That's a much easier analysis than a city like Santa Clara that has a plurality Asian population. So, understand?
Yes, thank you.
So just as an end game, if we were to recommend districting and it went to the council and it passed, and then went to the ballot, but the voters voted it down. Now, would a judge have the authority to still mandate the city to go to district elections like they did in the 70s and 80s with mixed income housing?
Yes. Yes.
So they could overrule us, or they could overrule the Senate.
Correct.
When we consider district elections, do we consider that element first, or the actually drawing of the lines and how many districts there would be? Because they're kind of interchanged.
That's another very good question. That's kind of a different component of this. And don't misunderstand me. I'm not assuming that this group is going to come to that conclusion that we need to go to districts. There's a lot of different variables to consider. But if you do, then you've got to decide how you're going to draw the lines. That's no small task. Like blocks mean everything when it comes to drawing districts. There's no way. I've gone through this process several times in my career, and it is very difficult. And at a minimum, you have to bring in a professional demographer. Under the federal and state law, you can't dilute what they call communities of interest, whether they're racial or anything. You've got to maintain those communities of interest, and it's not easy to do.
Out of all of the cities that, or maybe when you share with us the Cliff Notes version of the Voting Rights Act, I keep hearing district election, but is that the catch-all or the only way to get us clear of any violation of the California Rights Act?
In 2012, the last time I advised this body, the answer was no. Today, the answer is yes. That's been mandated by a very recent court case involving the city of California.
Okay, sorry, what is, the answer is yes to what? As in the district is the only way to
Correct.
Keep it clear of?
Correct.
So districts only not proportional voting or anything like that will not clear.
Well, again, we have a court decision that essentially says if a California voting rights violation exists, this is one court case in Southern California. The only remedy is districts, not ranked choice, cumulative voting, any of that.
So that goes back to 1407 maybe.
And that was not the case the last time this group met.
And once again, that has to be proven that there are racially,
But again, no such finding has been made.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it has to be proven.
We're not in court, and this group does not have a gun to its head in terms of determining what electoral system you choose to be the most appropriate for the city. At this point, all options are open. I want to make that clear. All options are open at this point.
Grant, I thought the report, the Charter Review Committee had reported in February of 2012, did a real good job of analyzing the different options. Would you be able to tell us what cases have been decided since that report that would influence our decision on?
Yeah, I'm largely talking about the City of Palmdale case. And I would tell you the full case name, but the plaintiff's name is something I can't pronounce. So, but I was going to cover that in some detail when we go over our voting rights. Perfect.
Thank you.
Palmdale went through many incarnations with their charter, and it tore the city apart. It was really, really difficult for them. Not the least of which is that the mayor of the neighboring city of Lancaster was the plaintiff's counsel in that case.
Could you provide the entire list of all 22 challenges that
I certainly will. When I don't have it handy right now, Deborah. I did provide that list to the city council when we talked about this, so I'm happy to do it again.
I don't think everybody here was on that same committee.
Certainly.
Assuming that Santa Clara went to district elections, how does that affect the mayor? Since the district elections are for districts only, how does the mayor?
Assuming that this group decided that district elections were appropriate and it got on the ballot in November, people that are not up for election now would not be affected in this election cycle. Only the people that are up for election in November would potentially be affected.
No, but what I'm saying is, if it's district, you have a council person for each district. But how does the mayor? Does the mayor run in all districts? Or is that
I understand your question. I think the answer to that is mayors running at large have been generally found to be compliant with the Voting Rights Act. I think in some jurisdictions they've argued that that is not appropriate. I don't think there's no judicial holding that says that.
Or you could add a council member and make it a rotating mayor system, right?
That's correct. That is an option. I think that's what, I believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, that's what Sunnyvale does. I know the charter was amended to allow a separately elected mayor, when was it?
1970s?
Yes.
Sunnyvale is a district like, or excuse me, at-large seat like Santa Clara.
And just out of curiosity, has Sunnyvale been challenged?
The same attorney who challenged Santa Clara in 2011 also initially challenged Sunnyvale and eventually dropped that challenge. The circumstances in both cities are not identical. We can talk about that when we get down the road. And ultimately, just to provide some history, the attorney, it was the it was a group called the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights that challenged the city of Santa Clara. And ultimately that challenge was dropped, I think, because at the time the same attorney was suing the city of Anaheim, a very large city, almost 400,000 people, over 3 times the size of Santa Clara. That case went to trial in 2012, and he ultimately prevailed in Anaheim. It was almost like Russia fighting World War II on 2 fronts. He didn't have the resources, and so he ultimately did not consummate the challenge in Santa Clara. It just kind of went away. So no one knows how that would turn out.
Current charter provisions for council compensation.
Okay. This one's simple. Council compensation is found in section 702 of the charter. That was set in the year 2000, and basically set that level at that time for council members were paid $600 a month. The mayor got $1,000 a month. That number is adjusted by the Consumer Price Index, not to exceed 5% annually. Today, that level currently is council members are paid $855 a month. and the mayor is paid $14.25 a month. And obviously, when we get into this in more detail, it'll be relevant to compare levels of compensation in comparable cities in the region and statewide. So we'll have that information.
And what was it for 14,000?
I don't know. I can say that the question of council compensation has been on the ballot several times over the years.
The history has been on many times. It's had trouble over the years, but the most recent time it was on, it did pass. And I don't know what the salary was for the mayor prior to that, but I know council members made $250 a month.
So it was lower than what it currently is.
Correct. And back in the day, it was $250 a month, and the council met every week.
Question on that. Not all cities put compensation in their charter, do they? Some, like, do you need to, in all cities, do you need to change the charter every time you want to?
Really good question. A lot of cities state that the council shall be compensated as set by resolution. That means that can be changed at any time. That, you know, the other side of that coin is that the council is free to, you know, change their compensation anytime they want. All you
Is
need
that
is
for
majority.
sales agents?
I believe so. In fact, I think they just did that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, just as a general proposition, anytime you want to deal with a level of funding that you might have, and you don't want to have to go to a ballot every time you change it, you just change it by resolution, but the charter has to provide for that, and this one doesn't.
And is this more common in the state to do it this way?
Good question. I would think in older cities like Santa Clara, and Santa Clara is definitely one of the oldest cities in the state, and we have an old charter, I would say yes. But not overwhelmingly so.
I do have a question. How is compensation set for other positions that are elected, like city clerk and chief of police?
Clerk and the chief.
Rod's got a sign to use it on the weekend. He's on the expressway.
In Santa Clara, the clerk and chief compensation is the charter.
So who sets that? The council then sets that?
Yes.
Okay.
Or authorizes the city manager to do so.
So this won't be something we'll be reviewing them. It sounds like
We may
unless you
choose to
decided
review.
one.
Unless you decided you thought that was appropriate to do that.
And can you provide us with a chart of the surrounding cities and other cities of our size showing if they're charter or not charter and whether council members are currently compensated?
Yeah, sure. Just in the region, 14 cities in Santa Clara County. Sunnyvale is a charter city. Santa Clara is a charter city. San Jose is a charter city. Cupertino is not. I believe Gilroy is a charter city. Milpitas is not a charter city.
You have to just provide us the chart for our next meeting. Not right now, it's too much.
Yes, sir.
Talking about the chief clerk and the chief of police, the charter doesn't say what they're paid, but the charter is the one that authorizes them to be elected versus appointed, right?
Correct.
So that would be something
Correct. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to address everyone. I think one of the things that we should do first is form a subcommittee that would have to look at the whole charter and bring anything new we want to look at to this committee. But they would have to look at the whole charter. So
Other
it'd be,
than the two items that.
yes. I think that'd be a good place to start. But I think we'd have to bring that to a vote.
I think this is something we
What?
can talk about under topics for future meetings.
Okay.
And then just to address an earlier point you made, Mr. Rafa, about voting amongst the group. You mentioned majority voting. One thing I just wanted to point out to everybody in a group like this, where everybody has obligations in the evenings, you're not always going to have all 17 of you here. So that there's the question of whether you want everything decided by a majority of the whole body, i.e. 9, or a majority of the quorum. And the city council has to decide most things by a majority of the whole body. That's mandated by the government code. There is no such restriction here. So a lot of you have evening obligations. Most of the time, not all of you are going to be here. In fact, tonight, not all of you are here. So it might be better to just have a majority of the quorum requirement, because I know that that's going to come up later on. Something to consider. You don't have to decide tonight.
And review the process for review of possible updates to the city charter.
We've covered a lot of this already. The mere fact that this is a charter review commission that has been appointed by the city council is very significant under the elections code. And what that means is that charter amendments, as I mentioned earlier, that come forward as a charter review committee and are ultimately put on the ballot must be decided in November elections. The city council can act on its own motion and under certain circumstances can put charter amendments on other ballots, for instance, the June primary ballot. We've already blown all the deadlines for the June ballot, so that's out. We needed to actually consolidate that election on February 1st. We didn't. So June is off the table for this body, no matter what. So the earliest election we could get anything on the ballot is November. Rod already talked about those timelines. So is everybody clear on that? So ultimately, we anticipate that you're going to come forward with one or more recommended charter elections, which will be brought as a package to the council, and the council will then, I don't anticipate that the council is going to pick and choose. They're probably going to, take the step to put that package on the general election ballot in November, pursuant to all the timelines that Rob gave. They're not mandated to do that, but I think out of respect to the system, I think that that's what they'll endeavor to do.
And so, just to be clear, because I'm hearing a number of people talk about potential, charter items outside of what the council was kind of asking us to do. My understanding is that we have the opportunity to look at the entire charter. Correct. We can look at, although council wanted to know about districting and compensation and so on and so forth. I just want to be perfectly clear that if one of the members here looks at the charter and says, hey, I fundamentally think this is way out of whack, we can leave that boundary. The council has not said you can only look at these 3 things. They're saying we'd like you to look at these 3 things, but we're not held to just those 3 things, correct?
I think that on the surface, the mandate was look at charter provisions which this body believes are obsolete or illegal. Okay. That was done in 1999, and a lot of things were done to the charter at that time. Obvious stuff, like being gender neutral and taking out stuff that was clearly outdated. If there's something that this body believes is not functioning as it should for the city and the citizens, sure. Okay. There's really no governor on that type of analysis.
Thank you. Guys, let me read for you the charter direction from the city council. So we've got it, everybody has heard it. The recommendation was that the city council approve the creation of a charter review committee to consider 1, the manner of electing members to the city council, 2, city council compensation, and 3, whether other charter elements are no longer in compliance with current laws or best practices. So it gives you both some latitude, but also some definition.
Yep, thank you.
That's referring to election. Then the third part that you just mentioned is referring to anything to elections.
I think so.
Right. So we should just focus on what we intended to be this, or we have a deadline. At that time we have to get this done by, so we had in November. Let's not start looking for every little hole that we can. Let's just stay focused on what we're supposed to be doing. And if it needs to be extended, we could probably afterwards try to figure something else out. But let's just stay focused with doing what we have to do at the time.
But that's not what the council has asked us.
That's why.
I mean, I understand we want to stay focused and we want to deliver what the fundamental issues are, and we want to deliver on that. But specifically from the council, and again, I don't want to go off on tangents, but I'm saying if somebody here happens to read it and has a fundamental disagreement with it, that if they deviate from those three things, and per the council's directions, we have the right, if we so choose, to bring that up and discuss it.
Yeah.
And
Is
I
that-
think
is that the
considering the
understanding?
obsolete and the illegal from Marx's, your
Okay.
kind of guidance, right? Otherwise you could just,
Yeah.
opinion wise, if you wanted to.
I want to read the last two, the third item again, just the. Sure.
So it was, number 3, whether other charter, I'm going to read the whole thing again. 1, the manner of electing members to the city council. 2, city council compensation. And 3, whether other city charter elements no longer in compliance with current laws or best practices. Current laws and best practices. The city attorney spoke was consistent language that he's used throughout the course of the council deliberations. That's how we put that into reportees.
Where in our handout is that? Our document.
That's going to be in tab 6.
Yeah.
It's under the recommendation section. It's the first few sentences of the recommendation.
So I would read it as, and correct me, Ren, if I'm wrong on this, the current laws or best practices, the current laws portion is if we are in compliance with any laws that are not related to item 1 and 2, which we've been talking at length about, but the best practices may open the door for us for something that we think is, like said, out of whack.
If the majority of you feel that a particular provision is not reflective of a best practice, then certainly a discussion of that item would be appropriate.
I was just going to say that I actually would like to just have everybody talk as a whole, not go to a subcommittee, because it gives the opportunity for everybody to talk about, what their concerns are, instead of, because we may miss an opportunity, and this is an opportunity.
So are you going to be attending each meeting?
Yes.
One more question. Could the council at any time revise this portion right here instead of just adding any other part of the charter that we feel is incorrect, and then just pull that out? Just a question.
They could. I don't see it happening, but they could.
You already modified part of it by going more than 15 members. Shame.
One council member voted 9 times that helped.
At least they didn't forget to vote.
Any other comments?
I have a question as to the role that city staff can play in terms of helping us do our due diligence. So you mentioned a demographer. Are there any other scenarios, or is the door open where if we as a committee determine that we need assistance from staff in a certain area that the city staff will provide? What are our boundaries with regards to that? Or are there no boundaries?
No, I just think that, what your needs are, if we have the expertise in-house, we'll provide that to you. If we don't, then we'll have to see where we go to get it. And, but again, it depends on what the request is.
And on the electoral issue, certainly if we want to dive into the Voting Rights Act, and we want to start drawing the lines, we can't do that without the it's just the complexity to it is just too much, and it's not really a legal question per se. And certainly, if the group decides that compliance with the Voting Rights Act is really an issue, we may not do that. But it's conceivable that a legal voting rights expert might be appropriate. I've certainly had a lot of exposure. I've been through redistricting several times in my career. I've been through voting rights litigation. I know what I'm talking about, but it might be better to hear that message from somebody who's not city staff.
And speaking of city staff, again through the chair, would it be possible at times if we felt appropriate to ask city staff to excuse themselves so we can talk freely amongst ourselves without your presence?
that's a good question.
So would that require that somebody else takes the minutes during that time?
Yeah.
Well, you know, it kind of cuts both ways. Many times at a council meeting, there's a lot of complaints that city staff aren't transparent. Well, you're a body that is supposed to deal with the charter, so, and you're a residential group of folks that are here to deal with the charter. So since the Brown Act is part of this process, the meeting has to remain open, whether staff's here or not. The staff has a right to be here. So, you know, precluding staff, I don't think would be a good policy.
Especially if staff, that's a resident of the city.
What?
If they're residents of the city too, they have a right to be here.
Well, anybody does.
Yeah.
Anybody has a right
Yeah,
to be
right,
here.
yeah, but especially.
Is it possible, there's
Right.
nothing to forbid
Yeah.
us from asking staff, as staff, to step out of the room?
Yeah, it's not a close door. We're not gonna have a close door.
We're not asking that, we're not.
Can I go back to the previous subject, or, as far as the demographer and, you know, looking at carving up the pie, because it occurs to me, I heard somebody else mention it, and it makes sense, is that, well, we might conclude that we, you know, the number of city council members we have right now may not be the right number. And so if we start dividing up the pie and looking at it, that might be the time to question, okay, how many should we have? Because I think that would make more sense to do it that way, rather than come up with a number and then try to divide it. During this look at it, that might be the time to, I think, to raise the question is, you know, do we have the right number? Is 7 the magic number for the town of Clara?
Yes, other cities have certainly done that in the charter review process. The trend has been for cities to reduce, not expand. A lot of cities, city of Richmond, for example, used to have a city that's, I think, smaller than Santa Clara, used to have 13 people on their council. And they've reduced it, and I think they're down to 7, just for example.
Are we still on 8 or are we moved to 9?
We haven't moved to 9, but if everyone's done, we'll move to 9. Okay, next meeting scheduled February 18th, 2016, city manager.
Yes, that's the next meeting that's scheduled, but if you go to section 2 of your binder, there's a list of all of the potential dates for meetings. So if you take a look at that, I don't know if we need your input tonight, but if you look at it, and at the next meeting, if you have any concerns or if you think you might want to add more meetings, please let us know so we can adjust the schedule. And the locations are also identified here as well.
Now, as we determine if we may need more meetings, then the city will help in terms of planning locations.
Yes.
And on that, we have to post it in 72 hours.
Well, an additional meeting would be a special meeting, so you probably need to close 4 hours.
Now, in terms of, I'm sorry.
If the body needs to communicate just on administrative processes, how do we do that outside of meetings?
With each other or with staff?
Both, just as a group. Are we allowed to discuss just administrative things, like when we need an extra meeting, for example?
Yvonne, can you maybe provide our contact information to the
So, I will do that. You have my email already. I'm really your point of contact right now with staff, and until we get into more detail, we're wanting the city attorney to respond back. And then as far as the group, I coordinate all of the meetings. So if the action is taken to schedule a meeting, it should be taken here, and it means that you have a vote on it. And then once you vote on it, then you would hand it off to me, and then I'd work on staff schedules, and I'd work on the committee schedules, and then logistics, because our meeting rooms are at a high premium. Does that answer the question?
If you have any suggestions for future topics, if you don't have any tonight, if you could let us know at your next meeting, we can certainly put those items on the agenda for discussion as well.
Well, it just seems like we might be under a tight timeline if we wanted to get something on the ballot for November. So we have 3 identified topics that we need to look at, and maybe some others. Maybe we should just agendize at least one of those topics for the next meeting and try to knock it off. But then there's some prep work for you guys to do.
Right, we were planning to do that, and I was going to mention that the city attorney's identified the 3 areas, and that we would probably concentrate on those 3 areas if you want to go beyond that. please let us know and give us some ideas.
So given that, one suggestion, and I would like to hear from the group on these topics so we can start thinking about an agenda item for next time, is we can have staff gathering data for one of the topics, for example, compensation, because we're going to need that benchmarking information anyway, so that they can go out and do that and then start tackling the first, maybe one of the first issues, which is trying to understand, first of all, with this California, voting right, is if it can be synopsized for us so we can really understand it in layman terms, then we can at least start working on that while we're gathering data on the other. And then meanwhile, because the charter is so large and we have this other third kind of ad hoc thing, people can, as homework, start reviewing it at their leisure, at least for a couple of weeks, and then we can come back and try to round back on a third item. But I'm totally open for feedback on that.
I have a suggestion. Oh, go ahead.
I agree with you. I was thinking the same thing, Mr. Rep, regarding the compensation. That sounds like it would be the easiest one to tackle first, and they could probably start getting the stuff ready for our next meeting. And at the same time, they can start gathering the other topics. That one out of the way, the simplest one.
Deborah's request to compile the various compensation levels in the region, whether they're charter, non-charter, and maybe also a distinction that I also thought of was whether they're part-time or full-time. That's pretty easy to do, and we can do that.
Can I suggest that people look over the charter for, over the next 2 weeks? So by the next meeting, we can at least have people proposing areas that they think we might want to look more at, and then we can schedule those out, but at least we can quickly see what are the areas that we need to dive in, and then staff can start generating information we might need more.
Yeah, that was one of my suggestions.
That's what you said.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So, Beverly, I have 4 things. One of them is what Jody and Howard were saying. I think it would probably be a good idea for us, because my understanding of the Brown Act is correct. We can't talk about something that wasn't agendized. So I would suggest that we probably, on every agenda, on every meeting, add an item that would be titled Review of Other Issues in the Charter. That way we could bring it up at any meeting without having to say, no, we can't talk about it because we didn't put it on the agenda. And that way it's a running thing where if anybody at any point in the process feels that there's a new issue that we want to discuss, or maybe the previous meeting was so long on the 3 main items that we didn't get a chance to discuss the extra one. So without being too long-winded about that, I think we should probably put it on every agenda.
Well, so just to clarify, the Brown Act isn't so mechanical in that you can't talk about anything that's not explicit on the agenda. If someone wants to say, I want to discuss this at a future meeting, but there's no prohibition against that.
But well, I'm saying if somebody comes up with a topic in the current meeting that wasn't necessarily agendized prior, then we would have to say, no, we got to put on the agenda for next one. That's why I'm saying let's preemptively put it on the agenda for every week. And that way it's just, review of other items on the charter to be considered, and then we can discuss it. If nobody has any new items, we can just move on.
It's a question you can't discuss, you can't make a decision on
I think into that category you can discuss it, but you can't make a decision on it. You'll have to bring it back.
You can't take action on it.
Right. So I think it's probably a good idea to
Yeah.
put that under, it's like a catch-all.
It's a catch-all.
Right.
So that was my 4th one. I have 3 other ones which I think Ren already talked about. Probably, I don't know when we want to do it, but in a future item, is layman's term for PowerPoint presentation on layman's version of the California Voters' Rights Act. The other one is on the compensation, and then the third one is on the methods of election. I'd like to see if city staff can help us compile a like what we've been discussing, what other cities in the area are doing with regards to compensation, and just kind of setting a benchmark so we get a good understanding of what else is out there, because I don't know. And then on the methods of election, I keep hearing district, but I'm sure there's other ways of doing it, like ranked voting, which I've heard, and again, I'm no expert, so I would like to be educated on those sorts of things. So if staff can prepare for us here are, 20 different ways that cities, councils can be elected, and that way we all have a level set of what it means when somebody says something, because I don't know what it means, and I don't know, maybe you guys are all smarter than me, but
Well, and I will.
it'd be a good idea to
I will
level set
give
everyone.
everyone a preview that as these meetings progress, there will be advocates for certain voting systems that will come to these meetings and want to discuss those. That certainly was the case in 2011 and 2012, so that's appropriate.
But I think before the advocates come and try to sell us on that method, we probably want to lay, a level set on what are all the different ideas, and at least maybe the more common ones. So I don't know when you want to do that, but just those are ideas for future topics.
Right.
You just made me wonder, you were talking about advocates coming in to speak to certain issues. I mean, are the minutes from this meeting put forth, like, to the public that they can see what we're talking about? I mean, how will they know what we're talking about to come and talk to you?
And we'll post the minutes for public.
The minutes be posted after you approve them. So they'll be drafted in the next meeting, there'll be an item on your agenda for approval of the minutes, and you'll decide that they're approved as noted, and then they get gone to the website for this meeting, will show the agenda and the minutes from this meeting.
Would it be possible to have these meetings audio recorded so that the public would have a chance to hear them if they can't come? And also video recording when they're in council?
I will say that I looked into audio, this room is not designed for audio. In fact, I don't know of any room that's designed for audio. Our city clerk's, council chamber, the only one I know that we can do video recording unless someone is something different than I do. And the city council chamber is already pre-booked because we have, as you know, our city scheduled for historical landmarks commission, planning commission, council meetings, things like that, that preempt scheduling right now. That's why we moved here to the central platform area.
Question regarding the compensation. Well, getting information about nearby cities or comparables to get an idea of what or how people are compensated. Also, I'd like to see is of the charter cities, are there any others that have the actual salary of the council members in the charter? I find it pretty appalling. I mean, I agree with Steve that charter is like the Constitution, and to have the actual dollar amount in the Constitution or in a charter, that's terrible. To me, it's just like how unwieldy is that? It's crazy. But what are the options? Is that the best option, and how do other people handle that? Are we the oddball?
That's kind of what I wanted to see, like how are other people doing things, because I don't know.
Yeah, remember that particular detail is one of the interesting I'd like to have you do.
I think we should also discuss just how we're going to vote.
Another thing I'll add to add on to what Howard said, that some cities have what they call a salary setting commission, and I'll make reference to that in the information we provide to you.
I was just looking online today, and I actually found an article in the Los Angeles Times. It's from 2011, but it just gives me an idea. It actually, the topic of the article is California City Council Compensation Scorecard, and like I said, it's from 2011, but it was very eye-opening, to see what, like Sunnydale, Santa Clara isn't here. Actually, Santa Clara is severely underpaid. But it was nice to be able, like people mentioned, Gilroy and Mountain View. And so this actually gave me an eye-opening as to what, like, the state guideline is versus what the average, pay is per city. So it was, it was a start for me anyway.
Do you mind sharing that article?
Yeah, it was,
or we can search for it if you give us the title of the article.
Sure, it's the California City Council Compensation Scorecard, and it was in the Los Angeles Times. Dated this, I know it was 2011.
Yeah, can you send it to Yvonne, and then maybe she can send it out?
Yeah.
We're going to general, can we,
Yeah, just the link.
can we do that in general?
I'll never write it.
Find anything?
I won't write it down. All right.
Okay. Is that okay, Sean?
I'll be looking for a month.
I have two questions, one for the chair. So are you going to put out an agenda before that we can see it?
That was one of my questions.
There's so many ideas for future topics, So who sets that agenda? Is that me? And then also, is the agenda set now at this meeting for the next meeting?
Well, it sounds like, stop me if I'm misstating, but it sounds like the two things that everyone's the most anxious to hear is kind of a primer on the California Voting Rights Act, and I'll set out that in advance. I'll do it tomorrow if I can. So we can do that, and then also the chart with the compensation information. Those are two pretty fundamental things, at least on the first two items.
So how do we bring that information from you?
Yes.
How do we get it from you?
Oh, well, we'll post the information in advance of the meeting, but I'll give you the link to the Voting Rights Act right away, so God help you if you're over through it. But
If we want to add, we can add agenda item day of, right, by vote. Like, if we came in today, we want to add an agenda item right away.
no. The Brown Act has very limited circumstances in adding on agenda items. It has to, it's
National
quite a bit. So there's that, but
What we normally do on these committees or subcommittees, what we'll do is we'll prepare a draft agenda, and with the chairperson or chairwoman of the committee, we'll share that in advance before we issue the agenda. So what Yvonne can do is she can work with all the folks up here to prepare an agenda based on what we've heard, and then we'll run it by you and see what your thoughts are, and then if you're okay with it, then we'll issue it to the committee with all of the materials contained.
So based on what I heard tonight and based on what you summarized, I think it's a good idea if definitely three agenda items I'd like to see would be, just the synopsis of what that California law is all about. Then the chart for the compensation, of course, after all the presentations, we'll have discussions about what that means for us as a committee and what we want to start tackling. And then third would just be the ad hoc open agenda item as we start looking ourselves individually at the charter, what we see as potential issues we might want to change, right?
I also had the one about just different types of voting systems.
Yes.
Although we may not be able to get everything in one meeting,
Yeah.
it's something that we want to eventually
And I
talk
have
about.
that as like
Okay.
a future, but in decision making, I do think we should probably talk about it for the next one, because if we do have to start making decisions, we need to, as a committee, understand how that's going to be done. So I would like that added to the agenda. Decision making process for voting when we decide on
Well, for the committee to go.
Yeah, it's either gonna, sometimes. Is everybody okay with that?
Can we decide to vote in majority or as a body tonight? Because everybody's here, that's the only reason I'm thinking tonight.
there's actually a few, at least two missing people. Still, that's probably
One of your committee members did notify me that they were not going to be here, and she had a closed session for school district. So, and I do apologize because I wanted to read this. Mary Hannah should their committee members, I asked that the statement be read on her behalf since she is unable to attend the first meeting. As mentioned in the letter, praying for the committee, Mary is in DC this week for the leadership development program and will miss the meeting as well as one in June office. While she would have liked to join us by phone or by call, that simply is not possible. Mary deeply regrets missing this crucial initial meeting, especially since she has not had the fortune to be introduced to all of you. In the meantime, between meetings, Mary will make sure to get up to speed on what she missed. Mary will join us in the next meeting and looks forward to working with all of you on this very important process. So it was beyond her control to be able to.
So should we make a motion to excuse her?
I'm sorry, say again?
Do we make a motion to excuse?
You can, but I don't.
No, I'm not.
I'm not getting paid, but she wanted to know that.
Maybe this is a future topic, or after especially we decide how we want to vote on things, but are people interested in kind of deciding on things one at a time, or kind of working on things in parallel? Because I don't know yet, but I'm getting a feeling that possibly at least the three primary issues that we're talking about, compensation or districting, or the way that people are, the council members elected, they are intertwined. So I mean, are we going to decide on them, sequentially or in parallel? Because they do depend on each other. So I mean, I know we have limited time in each meeting, that we may only be able to talk about one topic at a time, but in terms of our voting and recommendations on, you know what I'm saying? Like, we may decide on something on compensation, and then we go through the process of how we want to do districting, and then that affects some discussion that we had in compensation, and now we've already decided how we want to represent compensation.
Compensation won't have any effect at all with your redistricting.
Maybe it's a bad example, but
Yeah.
maybe it's a bad example.
I think the question is, do we want an ongoing list of things we bring up from the
Right.
charter, or do we just want the next meeting to be all the list of stuff we start looking at? And everyone brings what they have then, and we approve or vote down anything we don't want to look at the next meeting. So that we.
Not kind of what I was talking about, but I mean, maybe that's another issue. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, but what I heard from you is, should we just deal with the election style and do
Finish
that
that,
to
and
completion,
then go to
and
the
then go
other
on
one.
the compensation?
Yeah.
And I think I don't agree with that, because I.
Which is what I'm saying. I'm saying I don't think we should do that. I think we should probably work things in parallel as opposed to finishing each thing, because they're not independent, they're intertwined.
Well, also, I think you'll get to a meeting and you'll talk about it for so long, and then realize we need more information about something, and so we're sort
Exactly.
of stuck, and we need to
Exactly.
talk about something else and come back to that. I think we need to keep coming back.
I don't know how others feel about that, but.
No, I agree with that, because I think we do need to get information at the same time we're discussing something. So once we get information about one thing, we can discuss and decide what next action needs to be taken. We need tons of information in order to make decisions, so the decision-making comes kind of after the fact. But as you're gathering the information, we're gonna gather information first about one thing, then about another, we're gonna ask for more information and another, kind of in parallel, because we won't have time.
And we don't have time, so another thing is, you know, especially if you ask for city staff to prepare for us a report like the compensation, you know, comparables in cities around us, we may not decide to make a decision next meeting about anything, but at least we have time to do our own homework in terms of reading those reports, because we'll get a report and we'll have, you know, an hour and a half, or, you know, in this meeting, I'm not gonna sit and read the report during that hour and a half, we're gonna read it on our own leisure in between, and that's why, you know, that's why I'm thinking, like, maybe we should, at least for next meeting, you know, the 4 items that I mentioned, I know, Julio, you just focused on the compensation one, and Ren was gonna do the Cliff Notes version of the Rights Act, but I'd like to see the methods that other cities do, that way I have time to read about it over the next 2 weeks after the February 18th meeting. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Can't we just agendize it, and if we.
That's what I'm saying, I want to
don't get
agendize
into it,
that
we
for next
start
week.
it
Well,
up to the
just
next
for what it's
meeting.
worth, the information that Hossam has requested about other voting systems is not difficult to
Good,
compile.
okay.
Because, I mean, the overwhelming majority of that is just discrete majority votes, either by district or at large. I mean, there's some jurisdictions like Oakland, like San Francisco, that have kind of different systems, but there are not very many of them.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
right, Rod? I mean, it's
The
not
only,
that difficult.
the only point that I make, just in fairness to the chair, is that if you have, you know, 6 different things going 6 different ways, it's very easy to start off with compensation and then, well, let's dive into this, and let's dive into that, and let's dive into this, and by the end of the hour and a half, we really accomplished nothing. So I don't think one way or the other is right or wrong, but in fairness to the chair, who has to manage 18 people, which is 18 opinions, I think to stay as focused as we can on certain items, giving us the leeway to venture if we need to, but my experience has been, you know, there's 18 opinions, that's why we're all here, and for one person to try to corral that so we actually come out of this moving forward, I would just, you know, probably say let's be mindful of not having so much discussion that we, you know, it's analysis paralysis, and we don't get anything done, and then we're up to the, we're in the 9th inning, in the bottom of the 9th, and we got to get something finished, and then we're kind of struggling because of time. So I would just be mindful of that it's not an easy feat to try and corral a number of
And I
opinions.
would add, with the discussion that's being heard tonight as city, help from you guys can hear what we're saying. If we're saying something like we think maybe the compensation is affected by how voting is done, and that's just not true, or it is true that when you come back with some advice about how compensation is reviewed, might, because of the discussions we've had, be able to answer that proactively just because of the discussions we've had, right? And then that helps start answering some of those questions that would automatically start to come naturally.
I have a real simple suggestion. Could you 3 bullet points would you give us, so we can put them in these files that you said? I know it seems, but it would be nice to already have the time.
Let me remind you guys also that the end process of all the deliberations here will be a report that goes to the city council to say, by the way, this is a recommendation. So you can have discussions, come to what you think is a consensus generally about specific topic areas, and then if something in your later deliberations changes the way you see that, you haven't necessarily finalized what you're going to provide to the city council. So it is okay to take things, as you've reached consensus with regards to them, as you're still moving through the process as parallel. The concepts that you're talking about aren't contrary to each other or exclusive.
Are there any expectations that we will have regular report outs to council?
Well, usually the minutes go to council.
So that's it. No presentations in the council session.
There's a final recommendation. Is that a recommendation to the council?
I don't think so.
Usually somebody chairs.
I have a question for the chair. So, can you send us the reports through the email? For the upcoming thing, for example, the agenda and any information you feel we need to have for the upcoming meeting?
That would be by Yvonne, right? Well, staff is going to be working on the report, so if they feel there's something that they want to get out early to you, then they'll be working with me to make that happen. So you'll be looking for my emails.
But the agenda officer from you.
The agenda does come from me and the chair.
But I just want to ask Brent, we have to be careful about emailing each other, like in group setting, right?
In terms of emailing information out like agendas and all that, no problem.
Yeah.
But just the email issue pops up when you have a dialogue with each other about a specific issue, and you're trying to reach a consensus on this issue. Hey, how do you feel about looking at this provision? And then once nine of you get, it's not a big risk with a group this big, like I said, frankly. But as Mr. Rafat suggested, if you break off into subcommittees later on, it could be a risk.
Well, or even a reply all with some discussion that like
reply all.
One reply all,
Yeah.
which is the Brown Act.
Right.
Well, not necessarily. It's just
if it's a discussion.
The language in the Brown Act is you have to. The word is collective concurrence. Just sharing information amongst the majority of you is not a Brown Act violation. If you're having a dialogue about getting yes on something, then definitely.
So if Kathy sent us the link to the article, it's not a violation.
Well, I'm sitting to be gone,
But if she did, then technically I don't think that's a problem.
What if she's 10 of us?
But if you start talking about it, then that's.
It's only a problem if you say this article stinks and someone says, I'll second that, and all of a sudden everybody starts saying, yeah, that's true, and all of a sudden it turns out to be wrong.
And just be aware that your emails with each other are also public records too. Well, that's probably not true because you're not using city devices.
we're using our personal
So you're using your personal. I'll take that back. You know.
I know that.
Tell us a very important.
Madam Chair,
All right.
next step.
So next up, I was just talking to Yvonne about that. So she's been taking notes. She's got 4 to 5 agenda items that we're going to go over prior to the meeting. We'll make sure that they align with what we just talked about. And we'll get that out.
Before we close, I wanted to ask Beverly, and maybe you can communicate, because I know, Deborah, you asked city staff if we could record the meetings. Beverly, do you think that it is something that we want to try to figure out how to do? I know the capability may not be in the room right now, but we have iPhones or something that can probably do a good job of recording these Periscope. Something. I'm asking you if it's something if you want to ask us how we all feel about it. I personally don't mind. I think that maybe help me if I missed a part of the discussion, I want to just re-listen to it again.
You're free to record the meetings for your own use.
Oh, okay.
There's no prohibition on that.
Okay.
Otherwise,
very challenging.
When we are in the council chambers, will it be streaming or?
No.
There's only 2 meetings on the council, I don't know if that's gonna make much
Yes.
difference for 2 meetings.
I guess I'd like to investigate that further. As someone who's working with the public, that has been done by the city several times outside of the council chamber and in other places like the convention center, where they have actively recorded the sessions and at least audio recorded. So I would really like to have that looked into so that our community has a chance of hearing what's going on. I don't understand why that's being said it's not possible, because it's definitely possible, and it's been done by the city in meetings in the past. So I, for one, would like to propose that we have these meetings recorded, at least by audio, and made available to the public. I see no reason why that shouldn't be allowed to be available. It shouldn't be that difficult.
Or is that something that's responsible? I refer to the manager. It doesn't from the staff.
Well, when we've done it elsewhere, we've had to bring in quite a bit of equipment, and it was a major setup for us. And then when we did do it, we didn't really get a good quality. So when we put it online, you really couldn't hear people. It was really difficult to hear voices and the dialogue that was going on. So, and that was one of the reasons why we stopped having our meetings here, and we started having the work sessions over at the council meeting because of the setup and the audio that we had. So it just really had to do with it.
And the rest of you all, so.
I think it's upsetting that in Silicon Valley you can't. Periscope,
Well, I think
you said Periscope, I
If
think
you
that's.
have a recording, people may not be able to want to say what they want to say. You may just have people being reticent. And I don't know, the logistics of doing that are astronomical. And I don't know how we would do it, and who would be responsible for making sure that it is recorded properly. I mean, we're all really busy with our personal lives, and I just don't know how it's possible.
Very possible to do. It's done all the time.
I can't say this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm fine with the meeting.
The way it is.
The meeting is fun.
My personal opinion, and I would state the wrong, but I feel like the public's invited if they want to come, and then there are meetings that they can review. So just because of logistics and stuff, and I get what you guys are saying, my personal opinion would be to keep it as it is, you know. It's just logistically easier.
Now, if somebody wanted, we said, I guess, if somebody wanted to record it down their own, they were free to do that.
That's
Sure. I don't know, to me, the audio, I mean, it seemed like it would be interesting, why couldn't you have, four or five different phones
The only thing I would recommend
and
that you
take,
do
and
that,
take
Howard,
those files and merge them, I mean, because they're gonna be coincident, you should be able to merge them, and it's interesting to try.
Howard, if you're gonna do something like that, just let everybody in the room know you're doing it, so.
That would be the next thing was that, if we're free to do it anyway, is there anybody that doesn't want it? And then if somebody wants to try it, they can try it unless somebody objects. Anybody want to object?
You just have to.
I'm not always interested in it myself, but other than technically it would be interesting, but other than that,
I mean, if that helps you to go back.
Yeah, it does. I mean,
revisit.
honestly, for me, I'm saying that just personally, that it helps me to go back and hear what was said. But I guess if I'm the only one, then maybe I'll record it, but I mean, for myself, but I don't know how I just feel about that. It is a public meeting, but I mean, I know there are challenges, so I'm not trying to say that it's super easy, but.
Yeah, no, it was just really tough to do it the last time, because we're just not, she's right, we're not set up audio-wise in any of these rooms, and we tried it a couple times, and we just didn't get good quality at all. In fact, you get a lot of hissing and popping sounds, and it was just really tough to hear.
And you know, as people do this, and that is really hard, but, unless there's major objections, I think we should keep it as is. Unless there's a problem, and for people who need it, I think we can bring their own recording device and just let us know.
Why don't we just make a motion?
Is this a vote?
Go ahead, Madam Chair.
If you feel that's appropriate.
Okay. How many people would like to just keep the meetings as is currently? So that's majority. So we'll just keep it as is. And of course, those that want to report. Public presentations are next, and I have David Kathachuk. I hope I said that right.
I just call the chair. Call the orangutan out of 2 minutes. I don't think I do. I just wanted to say one thing that came to mind during the presentation by Mr. Noski about the council direction. He said that voting methods don't have anything to do with the Voting Rights Act and how they're separate from the method of elections. I don't think that that's accurate. The Voting Rights Act says when there's racially polarized voting, you can't use an at-large method that tends to prevent protected classes from electing representatives of their choice, and what voting method is used can affect whether or not a minority within the group can elect a representative. If you're electing 3 people at large and it's a straight plurality vote, or then you're going to end up with a minority not being able to elect anyone. Use other voting methods like cumulative voting or single transferable vote proportional representation, not going into it, but using other voting methods, then a minority would be able to elect representatives. So voting methods do have something, and you should be looking at that.
Thank you. This person is Kurt Arden.
Hello. So I have a question about it's a long, I didn't want to interrupt any of your things, but there's a Brown Act question, so it's back at the beginning of the meeting. You mentioned email, but what about Facebook, where I think a lot of people are on similar Facebook pages, and someone posts something, can someone comment on it, or are they going to run into a gray area and commenting on Facebook if they're not talking about a solution behind something, or trying to ask for a vote on something, but just express an opinion from the freedom of speech perspective? Does it preclude that? So there's more for me. I mean, I'm not even on the committee, but I'm just asking from, I heard that from email is one thing, but Facebook is probably a little more prevalent from a mass, just kind of spilling over on. And the other thing is, the recording thing, I usually have a recording device that I put up on the table that I put there. I didn't have it. I have my phone over here. It has been recording, so I'm sorry I didn't ask about it. I assume because it was a public meeting that I'm allowed to do that, and I usually do that anyway, so I apologize that I didn't announce that. Usually it's really obvious when I put a device right on the table. I've done that at the ethics committee meeting. So anyway, I apologize if I was out of step on that. I didn't realize I had to announce for a public meeting, so please accept my apologies on that.
You're not allowed that.
How dare you? How dare you?
Yeah.
So you want to address his question about the Facebook posting and how that?
Yeah, just the mere act of posting something on a Facebook account doesn't violate the Brown Act. I know at least 2 of the city council members are pretty active on that, so I would say no.
But if there's comments and discussions on the Facebook.
But it's different. So you're not communicating directly with fellow body members, and I would say in most instances I would say no.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate
Generally,
that.
you don't want a majority of the group to be commenting on
That- yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's where it would be an issue, is if a majority commented in some way. But just to listen to.
Yeah, I mean, conceivably it could happen, but it's probably unlikely.
So, and I guess the spirit of it is you have a closed email through and you reply all. That is what I took away as a spirit, but I just kind of extrapolated to Facebook where there's 300 people on it, and people, maybe all of you comment on it. Is that going to be, anyway, that was my bit.
Commenting is one thing, concurrence is another. So
Gotcha.
it's very unlikely, especially, I've said it 8 times, but
Thank you.
the group this size, it's probably not going to happen. I don't want you to feel constrained in terms of your dialogue with each other about mechanical Brown Act stuff, because most of the time it's probably not going to be an issue.
Thank you. Before we adjourn, did everybody sign? That's how we'll be moving forward.
I think you should pass it to, pass it.
Can I ask a quick question before we adjourn?
Yes.
I noticed that Saskia couldn't be here tonight, and I maybe addressed this before I walked in, but do I get the impression we can send proxies, and does that proxy have a vote? Or is that not the case.
I think there were some members, sorry to jump in, but there were some members of this body that were designees of a group like the CRC. Most of you were individual appointees after going through an interview process, so I think that's kind of different. There's a chamber appointee, there's a CRC appointee, and so on. And my view would be generally proxies probably would be appropriate.
Probably is from the council appointed individuals, they didn't appoint the groups. So certainly it's going to be, some of this is going to be the prerogative of the chair. But I don't know that there's a precedence for allowing proxies, when proxies are anticipated by the committee's family.
And even the groups that, they offered a person, and that, I believe that person was approved, not the committee was approved. So Saskia was the city council's approved person from that committee. So I would wonder about having a proxy even from the committee.
We'll have to clarify that. It's something, frankly, we didn't contemplate.
If you could check that one.
Yes.
Really? I think if there is some method of proxy determined, okay, well, this is how we're going to handle it, you would think it would be some kind of a written thing rather than just.
Well, and the other comment I would make is it's somewhat disruptive in the sense that if we're all working as a cohesive body and all of a sudden different people start showing up with different opinions and then get caught up, it gets disruptive.
It's certainly been our experience when going through the redevelopment dissolution. The oversight board seems to have a different proxy every time we meet, and it's been very, very difficult. The manager can second that. It's a new face, faces every time. It's very hard.
Well, the only difference I see is that all of you interviewed for your right to be appointed. And there were other people that interviewed as well who didn't get appointed. And if you have a proxy, then that person may not have gone through the interview. And therefore, there could be some very angry feelings that, look, I interviewed, I didn't get appointed, this other person did, and all of a sudden now that person can't make it because they belong to a group, and some other person's coming in who didn't go through the process at all. So I don't have an answer for you tonight, but he's going to have to check, but I can see where some folks might get upset about it.
Perhaps it would be appropriate as an item to vote on as a body at the next meeting.
I think so.
I think we should put on the next agenda,
Yes.
after we decide on how we want to vote.
Okay.
Perfect order.
We can actually vote on it right now. We have a forum. We have people that agree.
Well, we haven't decided if voting should be before the entire body yet, so.
We do have, I think I was going to suggest this earlier when we have more people, but we do have a majority that could vote on whether to go on the proxy or the majority. So if the majority voted, then there wouldn't be a question about it.
Let's figure it out next meeting.
But the other thing on the agenda is that what I've done in the past with other organizations is that, and this may or may not be a good idea, but several days before the meeting, send out a preliminary agenda and ask if anybody that wanted to add something to the agenda. Now, that may be more appropriate later on, because right now it's being inundated, but that's how, if there's enough time ahead, then that doesn't interfere with any Brown Act. You're just asking for something to be put on the agenda. Randy, do you think that'd be an issue?
In terms of keeping a finite amount of issues on an agenda and having expectations in terms of how long
as far as
it
getting
lasts.
input for items for the agenda, that would be.
Well, let me throw this out for you. I mean, the problem with doing something like that is the chair has already identified basically what the scope of the next agenda will be, and Yvonne will work with her at developing that. But if we start opening it up to people who just email or call us and say, I want to add this, then she's out of the loop until we inform her, and then everybody here is kind of out of the loop, and then something winds up on the agenda and everybody says, well, wait a minute, what's this about? And why is this here? That's why the catch-all that you suggested is an opportunity at the next meeting, because there is a catch-all item that if something pops up and you want it on there, then you can make sure that the chair knows it at the meeting, and then she knows what it is, and then it's placed on the next agenda. So nobody is left in the dark. Everybody has the same level of information, and it would be easier that way.
It's also important where it comes to the use of public funds, in that the second something goes on the agenda, staff is gonna start to research it, start to come up with background, and start to prepare for the meeting. And if it's one member of the committee that's asked for something to be on the agenda that other people might not be interested in, it's really then one person deciding how public funds will be spent rather than the group. The group has been constituted and delegated some of that right by the city council to have us support you as subject matter experts. That makes it difficult if one person places an item on the agenda. It also reinforces the fact that as you guys are considering not just the two really well-defined areas, but also the general review of the city charter, you want to make sure as you bring these topics up that you can clearly define that a majority of you are actually interested in even considering an item before you have staff go and start to research it in any significant level. If not, it ends up being a very difficult way for an already understaffed city to be able to maintain workflow for the committee.
But some suggestion of having that catch-all provision, that'll give you all the flexibility you need to add things, so you'll be able to cover it that way.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
could we procedurally, if we have a comment or a question we want to ask, can we each put this up like that and you call on us and just random people asking? Can we do that?
Does everybody agree? That makes it a lot more orderly.
I like it.
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, I think we're all adults, and as long as we can be respectful. I mean, we, it seems like I'm in grade school and I'm like, teacher, calling me type of a thing. It's like, because by the time they may come back to me, we may have passed a topic that was, 20 minutes ago.
What we did at the city, when I was the chair for the Citizens Advisory Committee, we just went around. So if you start here, you can ask, do you have a question, and then go that way. It's just, it'll make it more orderly. So you just go around here and you just say last question, that's the end.
I have an open dialogue,
Yeah.
but I also like it to be orderly.
We'll
So
never,
when people are
we'll never end the
just
meeting, maybe we'll
respectful.
just be going on and on and on in an open loop. We'll get, I'm just saying that in order to keep this thing focused on what we want to do and the things that would have to happen, I mean, there's nothing wrong with just going around in a loop like that, in my opinion, because we can't just go on and on and on and on and on. Some people have already left here because they have schedules to do, they have things to do in their personal life, is my point. I mean, we want to be here and we want to participate in this function for the city. It's an important thing to do, it's part of the civic duty, but we can't really go on and on and on and on.
Well, I think the agenda helps keep us on track. This agenda tonight was a little different because we're just all trying to understand how this is all going to work. But going forward, if we have specific agenda items, we'll start working on that specific topic.
Well, I agree, but his point was, should it be an open-ended thing where people just speak whenever they feel like it, or someone else would want to say something? I think that's the issue you're asking for, right? Can you just have an open-ended thing? His point is to put a card up and say, okay, I have a question, which somebody may disagree with, but I'm saying that if you just go around and ask each person their opinion on the agenda item in question, Madam Chair, that'll just make for a fluid thing going forward, rather than having someone speak here and then another person come up here and another person go here, there, and there, etc. Is my point.
Well, as long as people have the chance to restate how they, or another opinion, because a lot of times somebody will hear something that'll piggyback an idea that then they have another thought that they want to.
I agree, but as you go around, you can ask one more time, okay, last round of questions. This way, everybody gets a chance to speak if they want to.
Other opinions?
Do you want the mic, Robin? Because I don't want you to raise your voice. Please take the mic.
I don't know, I have trust in our chair that she will be able to run an orderly meeting that will give us all a chance to express opinions and feedback and all of that. I'm leaving that in your hands.
So,
I think that in fact, I was going to make a comment that I'd like to get us a little bit more organized, because what ends up happening is the person with the loudest voice ends up talking all the time. It's probably me and Hassan. So, and I'd like to have some orderly way. I mean, that's an unusual way that Joe suggested. To me, I kind of like the idea, because somehow, I know that Steve would like spend 5 minutes trying to say something. He would be in, he's like, everybody else going around. Come on, we got a better way to do it, and whatever it is. I mean, it's because I don't want this to keep going the way it is, because whether it's taken care of that way, but something memorially. And I'm sure that, you know, that you can determine, you know, that way during your meetings.
Yeah, it's tough when there's 17 people I have to keep an eye on. It, you know, the civil service was easy because people had lights and they would like blink them on when they had something to say, and then it was much more orderly, much more contained. Here, I can see people, but this meeting tonight, people were just talking anyway, even if somebody held up their hand, and I saw Steve trying to talk, and I was trying to get you. So going forward, though, I think I can control it better because I'll have an agenda, I'll have a better idea of the direction we're going. If I fail, then I'm all open for a different method, if that's okay with people. We can just try it that way, maybe the first meeting. Yes.
Sorry, Howard. Sorry on my life.
Remember, we have lights.
Sorry.
We have lights for our meetings. I never.
Yes.
I put my light on.
Yeah. Okay, meeting's adjourned till next February 18th, 5:30 at the city council chamber.
Did you get signed out? Did you guys keep it and bring